Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Econobox garage for this 75th episode in our Bugeye build. The goal for this week is to get the major mechanical work done, and that last little bit of work is installing the engine backplate, the flywheel, and the clutch assembly. So thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. One of the things I want to do is get the engine off the stand and just onto a little cart here so that I can bolt up the back plate on the engine, get the pilot bush into the end of the crankshaft, and then get the flywheel and clutch assembly all mounted up on that, and then that's ready to unite with the gearbox, which I finished off in the previous video. So there we have the engine off the stand and sitting on the little trolley here. There's the back plate. That goes on first. I'll replace the little bushing that goes in the end of the crank before I put the back plate on. And then go flywheel, and then the clutch disc and pressure plate will go on. And as I mentioned earlier, that finishes off the major mechanical. So with getting the major mechanical done, we're one step closer to getting the car ready for paint. So to help me put this pilot bushing in to the end of the crankshaft here, I have an old input shaft off the gearbox, and that basically, when everything's together, that rides in there, and then that bushing helps hold that end of that shaft from wobbling around. So it's also the ideal size to help get that bushing into that hole as square as possible. So let's give that a try. Now there you can see that bushing installed in the end of the crankshaft there. So that's step one. Next up, I'm going to get the backing plate on. Okay, there's the backing plate, or the engine back plate put on. There's 7 bolts that hold that into place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All these other holes are where the transmission will bolt up. There's a dowel pin here on the block that helps locate the back plate. So that pin there helps locate both the back plate to the engine and then the gearbox to the back plate. So next up is to get the flywheel bolted on. Now one of the things I noted in the manual, there's a correct way to orient the flywheel to the crankshaft. Now I've got the engine at top dead center for cylinder number 1, and you can see here there's a little mark on the flywheel, so that mark has to go up, and that determines the position of the flywheel relative to the crankshaft. Now I've got these bolts snugged up with the lock tabs in place, and I've just got to torque these now to 40 pounds as per the manual. Then I can bend the tabs up to lock these bolts in place. Alright, so the bolts are all torqued up. I'll just bend these tabs over. I'll give the surface here a really good clean with some brake clean, and the same with the pressure plate, and then I can get that bolted into place. Alright, next up is to install the clutch disc and pressure plate. Now with the pressure plate, there's only 2 ways it can go on the flywheel because of the 2 dowels here. But in order to keep things as balanced as possible, it should go back on in the same position it came off. You'll see a mark on the pressure plate and a corresponding mark on the flywheel that was put on there before this was disassembled. So I'm just going to put that back together in the same way. If you look closely down in here, it says flywheel side. So that side there goes to the flywheel. It's important that the disc gets centered on the flywheel because these splines here go on the input shaft of the gearbox. Now if that isn't lined up, that shaft won't go in properly and mate with the bushing that we just installed. So there is a tool for that, and that's this one here. So what we can do is put that in the clutch, put that into the bushing like so, and that tells me that that's in the right spot. Now I can put the pressure plate over top of all that and then just bolt everything down, and I'll torque that to the appropriate spec. Now I've got the pressure plate just snugged up a little bit to hold the clutch disc in place. I'm just going to pull this out of here now, and I happen to have, as you saw earlier, I happen to have the input shaft, or an old input shaft, off the gearbox. So I can use that to make sure, doubly sure, that everything is lined up. So that is good. And now I'll just tighten these pressure plate bolts up in a star pattern so it gets snugged down evenly. And I'll double check what torque spec that needs to be and do that as well. So with all this mounted back on the engine, the backing plate, the flywheel, the pressure plate and clutch disc, I can scratch that off the to-do list and move on to the next item. Well, I think that wraps up the major mechanical work, and it also wraps up this week's episode. If you enjoyed the video, please share it with your friends, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that, you'll get notified when the next video comes out. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.